Hacktivist podcast. As usual, as humanists, we are concerned with the promotion of critical thinking and human well-being. We'll be discussing news in Ghana, the rest of Africa, the rest of the world, and in science and technology. Today is the 17th of October. My name is Monica, and I'm joined by
Kobna,
Rosalind,
Echo,
Samuel, and Kassir.
You can find us as Hacktivist Podcast on YouTube and on Facebook, or send us a tweet at Hacktivist. You can also send us an email on hacktivistpodcast@gmail.com.
In local news, the Minister of Education has stated that Ghana will soon make a change from using the English language as a medium of instruction in schools. She said this at a forum held at the University of Ghana, where she was basically pushing the idea that the reason why Ghana is not doing well in the education sector is because the language of instruction is not the language that the students are used to. Therefore, if we switch to our local languages as the language of instructions, the education sector will pick up. She made reference to Korea and Japan changing their language of instruction, and that was the factor that pushed the education sector up. In my opinion, this has so many no-nos written all over it. I'm not even sure that it will work, because they've tried it before. They've been circulating this idea for a long time now, but nobody has had the political will or power to change it.
So I think there's some good behind the idea. Like they got something right, but then we just have too many other challenges in Ghana for a system like that to work. So in Korea, for example, I'm sure they have one language, right?
I believe so.
They have one language. It's easier to implement, like to get everybody to learn that language in school. Over here, we have over 10 languages, right? 10 major
40.
languages.
Yeah, 10 major.
How are you gonna teach? Which one are you gonna teach where? I just see too many challenges. I can foresee too many challenges.
Wait, but you said you think that she has the right. They have the right idea in some respects. In what regard?
In what regard? So the argument that if in school children are learning a language and at home they are speaking something different, it makes it harder for them to learn. So in a country, so I grew up in Gabon, and most people speak French. Like, we don't speak like the local languages even amongst ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I feel like learning French was easier because I was speaking French everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
When I compare that to Benin, I'm originally from Benin, and I compare the French level of someone in Benin and someone in Gabon, there is a difference. And to me, that difference is due to the fact that people in Benin will speak French in school and go back home and be speaking Yoruba, Fon. Like, this disparity causes them not to be as good in French as, let's say, someone in Gabon.
But you're saying they have the right idea, so should they drop the French?
No.
So
So
as a medium of instruction?
If it was easy, if, let's say, Benin or Gabon or Ghana had one language and people were speaking that language at home, it would be a good idea to teach that language in school instead of English.
I think that's a big if, like you correctly.
Yeah. So that's why I say we have too many challenges for it to work. Yeah.
And I think first of all, I think that this book declaration that she made is a political. It has political ideas, like to target certain groups, to make them feel like their languages are about to get more important or this thing. Really, you said in the beginning, Michael, you said that nobody has had the political will to change the language of instruction. I don't think that takes political will. I think that if you wanted to do that, the local traditional councils and the others would all support it. But the reason why it hasn't been done is because it cannot good for our country. You know, people say, "Oh, the language of the colonizer," but the fact is that our local languages were written by the colonizers. You know, in Korea, in Japan, in China, Korean, Chinese, and Japanese, their characters were written by Chinese people. Our local languages were not written before the colonizers came around. It's a fact. The Germans wrote away when they were trying to translate it into a Bible for them to read. So I think it's very misguided, just for a myriad of reasons, but I've just stated a few right now.
And I also think that this is simply a distraction away from the real issues on the ground as far as our educational levels are concerned. If people are not grabbing concepts they are taught in school, it's also more likely that they are not being taught the right things, or the teachers themselves who are teaching those subjects themselves don't understand what they are teaching. So that if you say that people are not doing well educationally just because of the language, is to cover up for areas where government and particularly teacher training could be enhanced to produce the kind of results that could be comparable to nations like Korea.
Talking about standards, if you look at our teachers that we have today, my grandmother was a teacher years ago, like around Kwame Nkrumah's time or something. And then she used to tell us that you have to be highly educated at that time. Not many people have been to university, but the highest form of education before you even go to teachers training college was like a university. You have to be highly educated. You have to speak very good English to be able to be qualified to be a teacher. But nowadays you have teachers. Teachers training has become, generally speaking, that for dropouts from senior high school or those who couldn't make it to the universities and polytechnics, then decide to go to teachers training. And also the dedication for the government schools. We all know that first of all, the environment they are teaching under doesn't encourage people to want to be transferred to those areas. And then those who choose to go are also not that qualified. And most of them also don't stay in the classroom to teach them. Most of the time, they hardly go to the class. The education of teachers is also very weak. So these are the factors that, I don't know why they will not use that to, they will not confront those issues and are rather using the local language stance. Plus, talking about, I don't know about Korea and Japan has a very high economy. So we, as Ghana, we are in a third world. We need investors coming in to transact business, to invest in this country and so on. We are now we are in a global village, and English is one of the biggest mediums of communication.
It's the reason why American tourists come here and they don't go to, as opposed to Togo.
Exactly. So to say that we are all going to start learning in the local language, at what point are we then going to start? When you finish school, or let's say you come out of university and you can't speak English, how are you going to communicate or work in an international or multicultural environment? And other than that, what's going to happen to people who want to come in here to invest when nobody can communicate in English, especially with countries that also have a different language and we also have a different language. English would have been the best medium for us communicating in. If that is not there, then how are we going to deal with that?
That's not to say there shouldn't be that level of respect for our local languages. I know our local languages are taught in our various basic schools, and if you want to learn more, you could even further learn in the higher. For instance, I know you can learn Chi, whatever language you want to learn, you can learn it in the university. It's an art. Language is an art form, and it's a surprise. Most of the languages in the world are dying because they are not being used. So I can see from the angle that we need to use the language, or we need to give more importance to our languages, otherwise we may lose them. But that is not to say we will need to derail our already derailing education system in order to effect that.
Yes. Also talking about us having multiple languages. How are they going to, like, for example, when we started learning languages, every region, I think Greater Accra, most schools have to study Ghana in Twi, which will not be favorable for other people, since we are like, what's it called, a blend of,
Cosmopolitan country.
Yeah, we are a cosmopolitan city, and people from all tribes and stuff are in this part of the country, and they have to be forced to be learning that. Other than that, now we have the computerized secondary school, high school placement, and then you are placed in the north or in another, what's it called, another region.
You have to now learn.
You have to now learn. That it's just going to be too tiresome.
And as it is now, that English is the medium of instruction. People don't speak English very well, right? And like you've correctly identified, because we don't have the best instruction, we don't have the best teacher. So can you imagine if we stopped? I think what would end up happening is people who can't speak or write Twi very well, or the local language very well, because we don't even have great local language teachers in any case. So we need to improve our instruction rather than playing political football with the education of our future.
Other than that, the books, that means we are going to spend another huge sums of money to translate all the books into local languages.
What would be interesting is to see polynomials being taught in Ghana. 3x squared plus 4x minus 7. I wonder how that is going to be translated. And biology, that would be interesting. That would be very interesting. How do we translate?
I think they'll brothelize, they'll trialize all the brothelize.
It's Moses or metabolism in Ghana. Somebody should tweet us at Activist Podcast and tell us how to say metabolism in Ghana.
Or we should listen to more of the Dome FMs. What's going to happen to all the radio stations where people speak English? Are they all going to have to start speaking advertising company? Oh my God, this country is just too much right now for us to do that. We don't need that.
In African news, an autopsy on a body believed to be that of Thomas Sankara, former president of Burkina Faso, reveals multiple gun wounds. So this directly contradicts the claims on his death certificate that he died of natural causes. So I was actually surprised by this natural death claim. I'd never heard of it. Like, everybody knew that he was killed by Blaise Compaoré. At least everybody believed that.
So this news, first of all, I wonder if there's going to be any criminal prosecution now that it has been officially established that Thomas Sankara was apparently murdered instead of whatever natural causes were ascribed to his death at the time. And this is keeping in with the theme of a kind of Burkinabe renaissance, in my opinion, or a period of enlightenment where the people of Burkina Faso 20 or so years later are going back to the ideological principles of Mr. Thomas Sankara, and I think it's very interesting to see what the implications of this will be, because Thomas Sankara had very, very wild ideas for the country, especially when it came to women's rights and equality. And some of the things that he wrote about were very, very radical in the African sense. So I wonder where Burkina Faso is headed, but I'm happy to see that the people have adopted a philosophical approach to these things.
So about your question of whether there will be whether people will be prosecuted, I think that will happen because one of the people accused of having killed him is the guy who recently attempted a coup, Diendere, and he's already been prosecuted for the coup. So I don't think it would be that hard to add the death of Thomas Sankara to his charges. So I'm hopeful.
So what you're telling me is that those responsible for the death of Mr. Sankara, they didn't find a way to legislate away their liability, or there's no statute of limitations for that crime that has passed or anything of the sort. They can still be prosecuted. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's not exactly what I'm saying because I don't know the Burkinabe law, but I'm saying the political will is there now that Compaoré and his clique is no more in power. If the Burkinabe people want to prosecute these guys, they can. Yeah.
Anyway, on when they are holding elections to have, they were supposed to be in January or?
Yeah, it's been moved to I think the 29th of November.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, for me, I just didn't see how it took so long for them to come to this conclusion, because I've watched his documentary before on Thomas Sankara, and I didn't generally everybody knew that there was kind of like a coup for him to take over, like they killed him to take over his to take over the country, basically. And we saw in the documentary did show moments when he was captured and all that, and then the government comes out and says that he died of natural causes. And why wasn't it questioned after all these years? Like, even if it couldn't have been done at that time, why did it take so long? But then yes, like Eko said, I mean, I'm happy that Burkina Faso has now been able to undergo all these investigations and come out with a more rational explanation for how he died, and hopefully those who have to be prosecuted should be to serve as an example to those who might be thinking of doing that in their various countries.
Yeah, hopefully this will lead to Burkina Faso being a beacon of human rights in Africa. From the beacon of human rights in Africa to the black hole of human rights in the world, Saudi Arabia plans to execute Ali al-Nimr for his involvement in the Arab Spring protests in Egypt. Mr. al-Nimr was convicted aged 17 in what human rights activists have described as an unfair trial, during which he wasn't afforded proper legal representation, among other violations of his rights. The Saudi state-run media site Okaz has accused Mr. al-Nimr of building bombs and being part of a terrorist cell, but Human Rights Watch has stated that these charges were just trumped up and thrown into a package of other charges in order to secure his conviction and subsequent execution. This has come in the context of a sharp increase in the number of executions that have been carried out in Saudi Arabia, starting from the end of the former King Abdullah's reign, and have continued into the reign of the new king of Saudi Arabia, King Salman. Obviously, as humanists, we unreservedly condemn the execution of human rights campaigners anywhere in the world. Speaking
in general.
Speaking for myself personally, I don't know if everybody agrees with me, but I'm anti-death penalty. especially archaic ways of execution, like beheadings and crucifixions, which are still being practiced in Saudi Arabia. So, from my perspective, and I think I can speak for almost all of us, this is very, very bad and must be condemned.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's all we can do. Just condemn it, and this keeps happening like every time.
And it's not going to stop
anytime
soon. Anytime soon.
It's
I don't know.
a gloomy picture.
I don't know if it's a law in their country that anyone who criticizes the state gets to fall under or like on death row or like sentenced to death or so on. Because if that is, then that is the law that should even be focused on for them to change it, because that's against human rights in the first place. Other than just focusing on individual cases when somebody comes and say, "Oh, I'll move to be freed" or something like that, campaign, hashtag, and all that.
Yeah.
Instead of that, we should be focusing more on them.
The problem with Saudi Arabia is, remember our previous episode, this also came out. They will challenge anybody who challenges their constitution, because their constitution to them is based on Islamic law. Mm-hmm. So anybody challenging them is challenging Islam. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm saying that it's not going to change anytime soon, because Islam is not going to have a reformation anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Islam needs a reformation. But moderate Muslims are not going to stand up for it.
So I'm going to slightly disagree with that. So I will start by saying there's not one Islam, right? Yeah. There are very few countries that follow the kind of Islam that Saudi Arabia does. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Saudi Arabia does. And the idea that they're not going to that Saudi Arabia is not going to change. Let's just say I'm more optimistic, because it's happened before. The Saudi Arabia of today is not the Saudi Arabia of 20 years ago. Things are changing. Things change. We can't predict them, but I'm going to remain hopeful. And it's not because it's based on on Islam or on the Quran that it's not going to change. People find ways of reinterpreting things all the time whenever it suits them.
But the trouble with the Quran as opposed to the Bible is that the Quran is today being read in the language, the original ancient Arabic that it was written in. So everything that is there has been there. There has been no changes in interpretation that have been written into the Quran, because that's strictly forbidden. As opposed to our Bible, where people's biases and language issues and just personal selection has ended up with a refined product that is very, very different from the original language in which it was written. As a matter of fact, if we talk about the Apocrypha, they just took a lot of books, entire books, that were taken out of the Bible because they didn't agree with what the people at the time of the Council of Nicaea thought was best to include with the other works of the people who wrote at the same time. So I agree with Michael. It will be very, very difficult, especially for a country that tries to establish itself as the authority in the center and the beginning of Islam and the end of Islam. The beginning and end of Islam to change, because if Saudi Arabia tries to even liberalize a little bit, Iran tries to start asserting itself as the master and the leader of Islam. Like you said, Wahhabi Islam is only practiced by Saudi Arabia. Yeah. But Iran tries to exert its influence in mainstream Islamic politics of Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Somalia. So this is what the Saudis are up against. I think like people like the Saudi king and the Saudi royal family, very, very highly educated, most of them Western educated, they know that it's not good to be executing people left, right, and center. But these changes are going to be very, 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 very hard for them to make. And so I think I agree with Michael.
That said, basically, this is becoming a norm. So, to me, it's just you just have to have something like a disclaimer. Like, we know every month somebody's going to be executed by Saudi Arabia, and personally, I'm just tired of it. I'm just tired of talking about it. The UN, from our last episode, the UN has, even though it's just on rotation, has Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights
Also,
on the Human Rights Council. We've set clear human rights violations. You get it? So even world bodies are not able to stand up to Saudi Arabia.
but isn't that because there isn't an objective definition of human rights? Because they believe they afford rights to people.
And even beyond that, the UN doesn't have that much power over individual countries, does it?
But at least they shouldn't be on the
Oh, you mean about being on the council?
Yeah,
Okay,
on the
yeah.
council. Because that is basically affirming them as, because
I wouldn't go that far. Because it's based on rotation.
They are chairing it now. So you are basically saying, okay, good. They are good enough to chair a Human Rights Council.
But it's based on rotation.
So take them off the
So take them off. I think they have
them off
to
the
check
UN.
about
Who will take them off? Because
who
they have the
makes
same
them a
amount of
member?
power on that committee.
What makes you a member
What makes
of
you-
the UN in the first place? I think if they have to set some standards, because if not, then if Saudi Arabia can be heading the Human Rights Council for
Can
the UN, then
heading.
I don't know which kind of exactly. And they have for all kinds of other crimes, petty non-violent crimes, adultery, and all this. And even his with Al-Nimir's case, I mean, he was coerced into confession. So even that one is not based on like proper investigation or using the rights.
But hold on. Aren't we being a little selective in our judgments here? I mean, if we want to talk about suspending countries for human rights violations, right? America routinely executes foreigners without due process. Should they be suspended? South Africa killed how many miners when they were on strike for no reason at all?
Exactly. I think that's when we start sanctioning each country.
suspended?
Yes.
I'm saying sanctions should be brought on all those
On
countries.
all those countries, if we start from there,
should
maybe
be-
that
there
would
should be a
change.
way of
But what I'm
Wait,
saying,
sanctions.
what I'm saying is that
Foreigners.
if you do start to suspend countries because of human rights violations
Well, not necessarily
or sanction them,
Yes.
I think that we'll end up with a situation like the biblical stone throwers who are about to execute the adulterer, in the sense that nobody is blameless.
Yeah, see,
I'm not saying that we shouldn't do nothing about it,
in the case of South Africa,
right?
what UN can do, hypothetically, is let the country know that these violations are going on in the country. Do something about it. And if they don't, then you can sanction them. In the case of Saudi Arabia, on a number of occasions, petitions have been sent, and people still get executed.
What about the
So
US?
Same thing for the US. So we should find a way of
The issue
Put
is
a country on a
the issue
pedestal,
is
all of them.
that those institutions that will sanction people don't exist yet, and the people who have the power to create them are guilty of human rights violations.
Good luck getting
you're never gonna have
a resolution condemning
Exactly.
violence against black men in the US, let alone suspending them from any.
So basically, there's no hope then.
Basically, that's what
In the fight for human rights.
in the bipolar world that we live in, in the quest for global hegemony, there's no hope.
So we have human rights
I'm more
activists.
optimistic about
Human rights activists and human rights activism is just fighting against the tide.
Right now, it seems so, but it doesn't mean that we should stop, because, like you said, you never know when something consequential can happen that would change everything.
Ebola is still in the news. A British nurse who was successfully treated in January after contracting Ebola in Sierra Leone is now crucially ill due to a resurgence of the virus. Also, Margaret Chan, the Director General of the WHO, wants countries to put their money where their mouth is. By this she's just asking for more serious funding for Ebola research. But more seriously, it appears that the Ebola virus is still detectable in the seminal fluid of about a quarter of survivors up to 9 months after infection. And if it is then confirmed that one can contract Ebola via transmission through semen, then the world especially our part of the world, will still be at a high risk of another Ebola epidemic?
For me, I understand this in the sense that if it's still present in the seminal fluid for the men, the males survivors.
Yes.
First of all, does that mean that the vaccine the treatment that they were given, was it the Z?
The Zima.
The Z, whatever. Did not work, or it worked to some extent and made the virus like dormant and hide in the sacs of the men. And what happens with the females? Did they test to see that does it also hide in their ovaries or some part of their womb or of their reproductive organs? Other than that, why, like, at what point did they think that they should keep retesting
for Ebola?
With the survivors? And knowing this, I think there was an article about the woman, a 40-year-old woman who did contract after having vaginal intercourse with a survivor, but they don't know if she got it really through him or his seminal fluid or not, which is not conclusive. So these are a lot of loopholes. Questions to be asked regarding this whole Ebola treatment, and then what happens to the vaccine they are doing now? Is that also taken from the treatment that they used and so on? Like, the scientific community has to come out and give more details into how the research and the whole process is going.
I don't know if they have the details right now. That's the whole point. Like, Ebola is still something where they're researching into.
I think that's what the director of WHO was trying to elaborate on, that the countries need to put their money where their mouth is. Nobody is looking at Ebola as critically as they should be. Because even looking at the treatment and then the management of Ebola, we realize that the virus can't stay in certain tissues. Mm-hmm. It can't hide from treatment in certain tissues, like the eye, like the testes. And
is it?
Yeah. So, for instance, the nurse, the Ebola was
was dormant in the eyes.
Was dormant in the eyes.
The British nurse.
Yeah, British nurse.
Spread back to the rest of the body.
Yes.
And then some of them to answer some part of what Rosalind was saying. Some people actually recover from Ebola without having any vaccinations or anything. They
just have to keep your fluids going.
System to fight it and so on. So, it's not just the vaccine that's to blame. They are all trial vaccines anyway.
Right.
So it's over time that we'll figure out exactly how it works and to what degree. So I think that the rest of the world has kind of forgotten about Ebola.
Yes.
But this has kind of brought it to the attention that it's not completely
the fight isn't over.
Yeah, exactly.
And just to add to, or to kind of respond to Rosalind's statement. Earlier, Mike and I were talking about it. You can't really cure a virus. There's never really a cure. You might go into remission where the viral count is, very, very low per part of your blood, but you can't really cure a virus. The best you can hope for is that your body develops the antigens to keep fighting against it. A lot of viruses, once your body masters the fight, you don't even need to take drugs to keep it down. But others like HIV and stuff.
And you can't transmit it at that point.
Right, exactly. So, to me, it just highlights the importance of research, and it further shames us as a country because we refuse to participate in the trials for the drug, at least in my opinion.
This episode's fallacy is the fallacy. This season we've covered a lot of different kinds of fallacies: the straw man, ad hominem, argument from authority, slippery slopes, and so on. And I think the fallacy kind of incorporates all these different fallacies. What it basically means is if someone makes a claim but is unable to have a sound argument to back the claim, it could be in the form of a fallacy or false evidence or just inaccuracies in their arguments, that does not render the claim to be false. So, for instance, in recent news, I think they announced that over 100 countries have submitted plans to manage their carbon emissions. And these countries make up about 90% of the carbon emissions that we have on this planet. And somebody might say, oh yes, obviously global warming is a problem because the Pope said that global warming is an issue. The obvious fallacy here is argument from authority. Just the fact that the Pope has said that global warming is a big issue does not make it true. However, it doesn't render it false as well, just because there's a flaw in the argument.
This week's quote is from Thomas Sankara. You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from nonconformity, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. It took the madmen of yesterday for us to be able to act with extreme clarity today. I want to be one of those madmen. We must dare to invent the future. I like this quote so much. Especially the last part that talks about I want to be one of those madmen. I personally, Rosalind, want to be one of those madmen. I'm glad that I'm in an age where we as young humanists have come out as atheists, as free thinkers, which is against the norm in our society. And we are brave enough to even start a podcast to voice out our free thinking views, our atheistic and agnostic viewpoints, and so on. So I like this quote from Thomas Sankara. We celebrate his life than his death. And we hope that the future generations will take up this as we also follow from, take a word from what he said.
I like the last part where he says that we should, invent the future. And there's this common misconception that, most people think that they have lived their lives trying to find out what their purpose in life is. And I think the right way to go about it is actually to create a purpose for your life, because there's no predetermined purpose for you. And you're just wasting your time trying to figure it out instead of living.
Or are you?
What does that mean?
It's a great philosophical debate, but
I just had to throw that wrench in there.
Oh, that's how
But I also like the quote and partly what Monica said about it. The future is not something that we are going to arrive at. We have to take charge and create that kind of future that we want to have. And so we want to live in a very open, secular society. It's upon us to start working at it now than to sit idle and think that we will arrive there somehow by some magic.
Hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Hacktivist Podcast. Sadly, this is our last podcast for this season, but stay tuned for a special episode probably before the end of the year. We're going on a short break and we'll be back sometime next year. So we'll keep you posted.
So look out for updates on our Facebook at
Facebook and YouTube as Hacktivist Podcast, Twitter with the handle at Hacktivists, and you can send us an email at hacktivistpodcast@gmail.com. That's HAGTIVIST. Until next time, remember to think for yourself and care for others. Thank you.